But the truth of the matter is that when it comes to selling your business, all that stuff about we have this special client, Google's our client, or we're the only agency that flies everyone to Puerto Vallarta once a year for a party. That stuff is not really very relevant. What's relevant, number one, is the EBITDA or net profit that you make as part of the company.
Hello, my name is Fred Valles. I'm your host for PPC Town Hall. I'm also the co-founder and CEO at Optmyzr, a PPC management tool and software. So for today's conversation, we have David Rodnitzky. Him and I have been friends for a long time. We actually started a publishing house together, Modern Marketing Masters. It is the label under which I've published my books. It's the label under which David has published his books. And David has a new book about how to sell your marketing agency. So how to make money, how to sell an agency, what to do if you're running an agency. I think that's a very pertinent topic. So we decided to bring in David and talk a little bit about that and see how it can help you in your life. So let's get rolling with another episode of PPC Town Hall. David, welcome to PPC Town Hall and congratulations on becoming an author for the, second time, third time?
Second time for me, yes, thank you.
Second time. I'm also two-time published and we have our own label. So before we get started, tell people a little bit about your background and where you're calling us from today.
Sure, I'm calling from beautiful San Mateo, California, and we're just finally out of the smoke from Oregon so we can go outside. My background is, many years ago, I went to law school and decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I moved out to the Bay Area, basically because I had a friend living here. And then I got lucky that a couple of lawyers were willing to hire an ex-lawyer to do something other than be a lawyer at a startup. Was working at that startup back in 2000. And the head of marketing quit and they had no one to do marketing. I volunteered and they were spending $25,000 a month on a branding agency and $25,000 a month on a PR agency and getting absolutely no results from either. And so then someone told me about this little company in Pasadena, California called GoTo. I believe it was goto.net. I don't know if it was even goto.com. And that was the company that created the whole concept of pay-per-click advertising. It later became Overture and then Yahoo Search Marketing. And then, of course, Google copied them. I can say that because they settled a $1.5 billion lawsuit admitting that they copied them. But that was the genesis of PPC, and I just happened to be there at the early stages. And not long after that, Fred, you and I met when I was working for a lead gen company around 2004, 2005, and you were on I believe it was the quality score team at Google at that time, and we had some spirited discussions about that. Way back
inside of the ring, right? We were sort of duking it out, like me trying to keep quality score high and you trying to get your ads to show whenever you wanted.
Yeah, you probably had a more legitimate argument than I did at the time because I was working for a lead gen company and we were just trying to some degree spam Google. but anyways, yeah, so that's my early background. I sort of just stumbling into Google advertising at a time when there were only a couple hundred experts in the world, and from there I started an agency, and the rest is history.
Well, you've certainly been doing this for a long time and certainly an expert in the space. But let's talk about this other thing. So the Lin Rinsky Ratio, you actually have a PPC metric that's named after you. And I guess it's your technical co-founder at the agency, right? But tell people quickly about what is the Lin Rinsky Ratio.
The Lin Rinsky Ratio is definitely a little dated now. But at the time, we were going in and we were doing audits of people's PPC accounts. And as you may have experienced, if you've ever had an agency come in and do an audit, they always tell you something's wrong, right? No one ever comes in and says, yeah, your account's perfect. We can't help you. See you later. So we thought that was just kind of not a good way to do business. And so what we did is we came up with a methodology, a measurement, which was essentially the percentage of your non-branded keywords or queries specifically that had gotten a conversion like in the last 30 days. And what we could show is we could say like, well, you are buying, $50,000 of non-branded keywords that haven't even received one conversion. And this reduces your Lin Rinsky ratio score. So it was a way of us just trying to be objective and saying, like, we're not here to just sell you. You must choose our agency. Your current agency is bad. Let's just set up a standard and then give yourself a grade. And it was adopted by a lot of people in the industry. The other thing that we invented as well was the alpha beta account structure, which maybe you're going to get to, which was just a way of sort of controlling queries on Google and making sure that Google didn't sort of use broad match to match you all across the universe. And that was also something that we just kind of gave away to the industry for free. People started creating software around it. I think maybe there's something in Optmyzr that might address that. I think.
Yeah, right? We support SCAGs and alpha beta, and we have a Lin Rodnitzky script that will tell you what the score is. I tried to do my own version, the Valet's shopping efficiency score. It didn't stick quite as much, but and it's like you're so gregarious, right? Like you gave it away to the industry for free, but look, people knew who you are. People are talking about your thing, and it's like, oh yeah, David, he invented alpha beta structure. So there's a lot of benefit in doing these things, right? And so ultimately, you got to this great point where, as I want to show the book here, but selling your marketing agency. So you use all of these techniques, you build a great agency, and now you're like, what do I do next, right? So talk to people a little bit about what goes on in your mind, or what's the decision point about selling versus not selling.
Yeah, I mean, in our case, we had scaled the business. I started the business in 2008 with my co-founder, Will Lin, and we scaled the business to 2014, about 6 years after that, where we were doing, I think, I don't remember the exact number, but $15 or $20 million of revenue, so pretty sizable. And we started getting calls from suitors, if you will. And I basically had been given some advice from a friend of mine who just said, listen, when you get calls from acquirers, hire an investment bank, even though if you don't have any plans to use them in the near future, and let that investment banker just talk to all these parties and keep them warm, so to speak. So that's what we did. We had 6 or 7 people who called us, private equity, holdco, strategic advice, strategic companies. And at some point around late 2014, we said, there's enough interest here that we should at least just see what happens if we actually ask them to submit offers. And we had a number in mind, and we obviously there were a lot of elements around making sure that we worked with someone that we really believed in them as a partner, and it was good for clients and good for employees. But we ran what I call a mini process. So we didn't do a full process, which is when you send out 50 emails to a lot of people who you've never even met. This was just send it to 6 or 7 people and said, look, we're not for sale, but since you want to buy us, give us an offer. And we did that process, and we ended up getting 3 offers, one of which was significantly outsized from the other one, and it happened to be with a company that we really liked. And we decided to take the offer and see what happened as a sold company.
That's amazing. So you fell into an agency not even wanting to be an agency. I think a lot of people go into agencies maybe wanting to sell it. Talk a little bit about like what creates value in an agency, and if you want to sell it, like what is the main thing you should worry about? Like, is it that size of revenue, the type of client? Is it the technology you build? So what are the value drivers?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge difference between maybe what agency owners are thinking on a day-to-day basis about what they want out of an agency, and then what it takes to sell the agency. As you said, I mean, when I started the agency, my main objective was to not have to work for someone else ever again. So I was just like, I'm not good at working in a company. Whenever there's a political battle, I lose. And I'm not happy when other people make decisions that I don't agree with. So I'm just going to start an agency and do it my way. And so I did everything I always wanted to do, but never did when I was at someone else's company. So I offered, unlimited PTO and 100% work from home when that was not sort of a thing that everyone did. Initially with our clients, we had 48-hour out clauses in all of our contracts for no reason at all. So I said, look, if we're not driving profit for you yesterday, fire us. And so just built something that I thought was really great. In terms of, what people were looking for when we sold the agency, I think one of the there's You know, Tim Ash, who's a usability expert down in San Diego, he has a concept. He says your baby is ugly when he does landing page design reviews. And I think every agency founder and also website owner thinks that their agency is beautiful and special and deserves to be treated, you know, way more better than the average agency. And that's great. I mean, I think you need to have a little bravado when you're working and running your business. But the truth of the matter is that when it comes to selling your business, all that stuff about we have this special client, you know, Google's our client, or, you know, we're the only agency that flies everyone to Puerto Vallarta once a year for a party. That stuff is not really very relevant. What's relevant, number one, is the EBITDA or net profit that you make as part of the company. And basically, acquirers have a range of multiples that they all work against. And they all come down to a multiple of EBITDA. So if you're doing $1 million of EBITDA a year, you're probably worth something in the range of $2 to $4 or $5 million as an agency for sale.
Okay, so let's pause on that, right? So as a services business, you're saying that you see between a 2 to 5x multiple on the EBITDA.
No, not exactly. So the interesting thing about EBITDA ranges is the higher your EBITDA, the higher the multiple. So if you're $1 million business, you probably have maybe 5 or 10 people in the company. Most likely the sales is done by the founder, maybe even most of the client service is done by the founder. And so acquirers don't really see you as having a hugely sustainable business outside of the founder's sort of sphere of influence. So you get a low multiple. So you might get 2, 3, 4 times that EBITDA number, annual EBITDA. If you are a $10 million business, $20 million EBITDA business, now acquirers see you as sustainable beyond the founder. You've built something that has enterprise value. Oftentimes, what's that?
There's a process in place. Wasn't it you who said that if it's an agency without like process, it's just a bunch of people running around?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, usually you can't build a $20 million EBITDA business with just a bunch of smart people sort of doing smart things. That doesn't work. Well, you can do that when you have 5 or 10 people, and it's just kind of like you know, you sit down every week and you brainstorm and come up with an idea of how to make an account better. So the bigger the profitability of the agency is, the bigger the EBITDA, the higher the multiple. So if you're and multiples fluctuate for many, many reasons, but at this point, if you're doing $10 million of EBITDA right now, you're probably worth something in the range of, call it $80 to $120 million. So 8 to 12 times EBITDA versus that 2 to 4 times EBITDA for the company that's doing $1 million of EBITDA. So it does vary significantly.
Okay, cool. So, and then that's basically then the value drivers, right? So if you're looking at what do you build in your agency, you're saying build up your EBITDA. But the other things that kind of come along with that is have the process, have the staffing levels, like make not everything dependent on you. And so that's one thing I also think about in my business, right? Is there are so many things I still do, like speaking at conferences, some of the thought leadership, some of these PPC Town Hall episodes. But what would happen if, you know, I got hit by a bus tomorrow? Like, would the business still go on? And so even though I enjoy doing these things, it's good to have backup. And in terms of like our customer support teams, we never have a single point of failure, right? It's not about one person being the account manager. It's about having a pod so that if one person gets promoted, if one person decides to take on a different role, that client still is supported, has continuity. And these are the types of things that build value and sustainability in a business.
Yeah, I've always said that the job of an entrepreneur is to fire himself from jobs. And that actually has 2 benefits in a business. Number one is it helps you scale the business, because as you said, if you're an army of one and you're the person who's responsible for sales and for client services and for product development, you just can't scale the business. That's number one. But number two, it gives you optionality when you do sell the business. A lot of agency founders actually purposely spend about a year before they sell their business, extricating themselves from roles and making themselves seem as irrelevant as possible. Because then when it comes time to sell, you can sort of tell the acquirer, like, look, I'm the guy who founded the company, but I'm not really that relevant today. So you should basically just pay me out and take my agency. Or you can sort of, if you want to stay, you can certainly make the argument that you can stay actively involved and still continue after the sale takes place.
I think that's interesting, right? Because you're basically making the point, listen, I'm no longer necessary as a founder, but maybe I do want to stay on. But because that's another big question, right? Like you've probably spent 5 years, 10 years building this agency, building it up to the point where it is. And now to have the thought that from one day to the next, somebody else owns it, like you wake up and yeah, maybe you have a lot of money in the bank, but like, what's your purpose in life at that point, right? So what do you do next? And talk a little bit about what that decision was for you and what did you do after?
Yeah, I mean, I think that oftentimes people don't realize that when you sell your business, you're selling your identity and purpose for cash. And in a lot of instances, that doesn't seem like a very good trade-off. I mean, if you have spent 10 or 20 years building an agency and you're really enjoying being sort of at the center of this industry and you like speaking, and suddenly someone buys your agency and they're like, we don't need you anymore, that can be challenging. So I actually think that it's something that founders have to think pretty carefully about what do you do? Do you stay with the company? You convince the acquirer that you need to be the go-to person, or do you sort of put yourself in a position to sort of to move on? When we sold so we actually sold 3 times, which is a little strange because the first time we sold, I mentioned that we did this mini process and we were very excited about it. The company that we sold to eventually wasn't able to sort of figure out how to pay us what we were owed on our earnout, which is another topic we could talk about. But when we sold to that company the first time, I made it very clear to them that I wanted to continue with the business, at least while we were doing the earnout. And it was great. We negotiated the contract with that in mind. And we basically said, until we get paid our earnout, we're basically an independent company. We control HR, we control which clients we take on, we control how much we charge, we control our margins, et cetera. So I was very much clear to them that I was not going anywhere. When we sold, well, the second time and to some degree the third time, especially the third time when we sold to this holding company in Holland called Dept, which is great, and it's been a great relationship. I made it very clear from the beginning that I was not interested in continuing in sort of a leadership capacity, and it was just a matter of being honest with them and convincing them that the business could exist without me. So,
and to talk about that progression, right? Because the first time you said, listen, I want to remain in this business. And part of it was to guarantee that the earnout would happen because you probably were afraid. And then maybe it was your fear, but a legitimate fear is somebody else takes over. If there's an earnout, then that other person, the new owner, could screw it up. And that means you don't get paid all this money that you're owed. But you also talked about you wanted to remain in the industry and remain an influencer and have that sphere of influence, right? But then clearly something happened between that time and now the third time that you sold, and you're like, I'm done with this. Like,
yeah,
talk about what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I mean, number one is I think that there are 2 types of leaders of agencies or of any business, really. There's stage-specific leaders and stage-agnostic leaders. And so a stage-specific leader is someone who is really good at one point in the agency's growth, but then isn't good at another point. And a stage-agnostic leader is someone who can take a business from one person in a coffee shop to, an IPO or whatever. And I sort of realized at some point that I was a stage-specific leader. So I was very good at taking the business from 1 to 100 people. I was pretty good at taking the business from 100 to 250 people, and I was not good from taking it above 250. And I think part of that is that I'm sort of a guy that loves coming up with crazy ideas and strategies and creating Lin Rinsky ratios and all that stuff. That's to me what I really enjoy. Less so, how do we go from 250 to 300 people, and how do we make sure that we increase our EBITDA from 16.1% to 16.3%? And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that sort of, that's a very important part of a business. And we brought in a CEO after me who did a fantastic job of that. That's just not what I'm good at or what I like. So I kind of realized that as we grew.
Well, and I think most people who start an agency is because they love marketing, they love playing with PPC, and like you said, Lin Rinsky ratio, should we do alpha beta structure? Should we use PMAX campaigns? All of these important questions, right? And then like you're saying, at some point it becomes about like, what's the contract we put in place? How do we hire enough people? And nothing is about PPC and the thing that you started with. Everything is about running the business. And that's where it makes a lot of sense that at that point you bring in, well, you have two options, right? You either bring in professional leadership, which is kind of when I was at Google, like Eric Schmidt was brought in to manage Larry and Sergey. And then eventually, of course, the company goes public and gets sold, right? So those were the considerations. Yeah, very interesting how you went through. And what happened the second time, by the way, that you sold? So now the last time it's a holding company. The first time it was another agency, it sounds like.
So the first time we sold to a strategic. It was a company called Hart Hanks. They're publicly traded. They're not in Texas. They were historically in a lot of offline marketing, like direct mail and fulfillment, and they realized they needed a digital marketing presence, and so that's why they acquired us. We ended up amicably deciding that myself and the founders of the company would buy our company back after 3 years during the earnout period. And when we bought it back, we thought, well, we're back independent again. Hooray! Let's keep doing this forever. And the same thing happened to us that happened the first time. We started getting calls from acquirers who were interested in making us an offer. And so we said, well, we might as well see what's out there. And we did get a lot of great offers. And we ended up getting 2 family offices in Chicago, PSP Capital and Erie Street Capital, that went in together to make us an offer that we accepted. And it was great. It's more of a private equity model than the strategic model as before. When we signed the deal, I was like, I was very curious to know how private equity could sort of impact the business. And it kind of is what I said before about like being a stage agnostic or stage specific leader. I mean, the private equity guys just have a much finer tuned pencil. That's probably a really bad analogy, but it doesn't make any sense. But they have the ability to look at a business and say, how can we take this from doing X amount of profit to Y amount of profit without destroying the business? And they did. And I was already sort of firing myself from jobs, but when they came in, I was able to fire myself a lot faster. As I said, we brought in a CEO, Rob Murray, who had been the CEO of iProspect, great guy. Who also had this ability to sort of lead at a stage that I couldn't lead at. And so the combination of the private equity guys and bringing in Rob and his team really accelerated the growth of the business substantially.
One thing I'm curious about, when private equity comes in, right? Sometimes it seems appealing that you as an agency or you as a business about to be acquired have one thing that you're particularly weak at. So for example, say that you don't have a really strong sales team. You're really good at executing, but you're not great at like selling to enterprise customers. Is that a positive or a negative in your book? The way that I sometimes think about it is like, ooh, private equity would look at that and be like, oh, well, if we just put the right person in place and fix that sales process, like that is worth so much money right there off the bat. That's an easy fix for someone who knows how to do that. So like if you're running an agency, is it like good to have one thing you're not that good at, or would you recommend like everything needs to be solid and then private equity will take it to that next level?
I mean, I think that it's always good to do the best at everything you can do. So I don't think you should sort of like be okay with having a flaw and think, well, someone's going to eventually fix this. I mean, I think that the private equity companies typically have some sort of playbook that they're bringing to the equation. So when they're doing their due diligence, they're sort of checking things off and they're saying like, is this company good at sales? Are they good at marketing? Do they have their finances in order? And if they find something that they think is an easy fix, then that probably in a way encourages them to make a bid because they can see that there's going to be an improvement in the performance. But at the same time, I mean, if you're a super well buttoned up company, if you have best of class across the board in every single functional unit, there's going to be plenty of acquirers out there who want to invest in you and who will make you sort of the tip of the spear, or sometimes they call it like the platform, where they're going to sort of buy you and they're going to buy 10 other agencies or technology providers in addition. They're called add-ons that collectively they want you to lead and make it into a much bigger company.
And now you said you were fortunate, right? Like people are constantly reaching out to acquire you. And I see the same thing, like whether you own real estate or you own a company, like there's always interest. at some level, and you just said, hey, fine, we'll see what's up. If you don't have that interest, why is that? Like, is something wrong with your business? Do you just need to hire that banker to generate that interest? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we were fortunate, I think, because in our little world of PPC agencies, there were sort of known independent leaders. So at the time when we were selling, there were anywhere between 5 and 7 agencies that everyone sort of knew about, that were the sort of fast-growing independent companies. So we were sort of in that world where we were just getting a lot of outbound, inbound interest because we were a known entity. For companies that are not in that space, there are a couple options. Number one is just to hire an investment banker. And to your point, you're right. An investment banker, especially one that has experience in the industry, is going to know all the usual suspects, and they are going to be able to send around 10 or 15 emails very quickly and say, hey, I don't know if you've heard of this company. They're thinking about going to the market. Are you interested? Beyond those 10 or 15 companies, they can also send to 20 or 30 other companies that may not be usual buyers, but that they think there could be a connection there. That would be like a strategic that's like, looking, potentially considering acquisitions. So there's a ton of value there to the investment banker. If you're smaller, the challenge with investment bankers is they usually don't sort of quote unquote get out of bed unless they're going to be paid $1 million for a transaction. So that usually means that they want to only work with companies that have, let's say, a minimum of $3 million of EBITDA, because they figure maybe $3 million times 8, let's say, or 7 is $20 million. They get, 2 or 3% of that. Somehow that works out to $1 million. I'm not exactly doing the math. But for companies that are smaller than $3 million of EBITDA, there are companies online like We Are Barney, which is probably the biggest in the space, which are brokerage firms that don't have the white glove service of an investment bank and are really more of a place where you can just list your business online and people can search for businesses like yours and make an offer.
And what about if you're one of these smaller agencies right now, would you go and talk to other agencies that are smaller as well and see if you can join forces to accelerate faster? And clearly, I mean, you ran really good agencies, right? Like 3Q, I think, was the latest. You had really flagship clients. You guys were known as like a leader. A lot of that thought leadership that you did really helped. I mean, do you think that's, and obviously I think you're going to say that's the way to go, but if you don't have that, if you've tried that, should you just join forces with smaller agencies? And then if you join with smaller agencies, would you be like, hey, we do SEM, let's find an SEO agency, let's find a social agency, or would you just try to grow in like one space?
You can. I think that, whether you're selling your agency or you're buying other agencies, there's a level of expertise that you just need to get to feel comfortable making the deal happen. Mergers and acquisitions, there was some statistic that said something like 60% of mergers and acquisitions fail, at least based on the expectations of the companies involved. And I mean, I kind of relate this to like when you're applying for a job, all you see is the opportunity. And when you're at a job, all you see is the warts. It's kind of the same in M&A. I mean, you're looking to join forces with another agency and you're like, oh my God, they do SEO, we do SEM. They're in California, we're in New York. This is peanut butter meets chocolate. It's going to be, Reese's peanut butter cups. You don't really, if you're not an expert, you don't really see some of the challenges that could come up. So I think that you can come together with other agencies, but I think it has to be a very careful process. I think for starters, you need to, if preferably, really know the founders and have a track record with them and not just sort of randomly join forces. You need to do a lot of due diligence. You need to ask a lot of questions. If possible, you need to either have an M&A advisor or an investment bank representing you when you're looking at making that acquisition. I mean, I will tell you that we made an acquisition at 3Q before we were acquired by anyone else. And it was a very good acquisition. It was one of the founders was a guy that I had known in the industry for many years. It turned out to be, a really good 2 + 2 = 5 acquisition. But one of the things that I didn't do in the due diligence, which I mean, I might have known better if I'd had an expert working with me, or if I'd done it a couple of times. So I didn't realize that the company we were acquiring had an inventory of maybe 200 domains that were all adult domains. and they were basically making affiliate revenue off these adult domains from these porn sites. And so that was part of their EBITDA that I didn't understand it because I didn't know how to do due diligence. And so when we acquired them and we saw what we had, I was like, well, this is not consistent with our brand. So we just unloaded it for pennies in the dollar. But that's an example of like, if you don't know what you're doing and you're trying to acquire another company, there can be pain points along the way.
Yeah, lots of pitfalls, red flags. Well, hey, this has been great. So obviously there's a lot more information in the book. So go on Amazon, Selling Your Marketing Agency by David Rodnitzky. Check it out. Great book, great content. Whether you're looking to sell right now or you think it's an option in the future, definitely a good book to have because it's going to help you put all the right pieces in place for when that day potentially comes. Now, you, David, having done this 3 times, what's next? How do people get a hold of you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so what's next is I'm launching a website, or probably launched by the time this goes live, called AgenticShift.com. And it's going to have a bunch of content related to the book and beyond the book. And ultimately, I'm sort of starting a consultancy where I can hopefully help founders learn on my dime when they go through the agency selling process. I think one of the things that I have realized about selling your agency is that pretty much everyone who's involved in the process is an expert at M&A, except for the founder, for whom this is the first and most important financial transaction of their life. So I'm trying to be sort of a founder whisperer. That's kind of what I'm trying to do post agency, and just work with founders and help them get the highest valuation, and also just pick the right home for their agency, and make sure that once they do sell it, that they leave happy and they don't have regrets or seller's remorse. That's what I'm working on. And if anyone wants to reach out, you can reach me at david@agenticShift.com, and I'd be happy to talk to them.
Nice. It sounds like you should be getting a lot of emails. Definitely a topic that many agency owners want to talk about. So yeah, hey, David, thank you for sharing some of your insights and for putting it all in a book. Sounds great that you're building an agency around it. So we'll put all of this in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. But if you've enjoyed PPC Town Hall and want to see more of these episodes, hit the subscribe button right there at the bottom. And if you are an agency or an in-house team and you're looking for some software to find out your Lin Rinsky Ratio or some other aspects of your auditing, reporting, automation, Optmyzr will do that. We have a 2-week free trial, so check that out. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the next episode.